The rain had been falling since dawn. Soft, steady, like a whisper the city had long grown used to. People hurried past the narrow street, umbrellas tilting, shoes splashing through shallow puddles that mirrored the dim light of the morning. At the corner of the street, tucked between a bookstore and an old apartment block, stood a small coffee shop called Haven Brew. Its wooden sign was faded, its windows fogged with the breath of warmth inside. To anyone walking by, it looked unremarkable, a tiny shelter in a quiet part of town. But to those who ever stepped inside, it was something else entirely, a pause in time, a place where everything slowed down just enough to breathe. Adrian had owned the cafe for 3 years now. He was 30, quiet, with a gentleness that people felt before they even noticed him. His movements were deliberate, his voice low, his presence steady, like the rain that never rushed, never stopped. Every morning he arrived before dawn, turning on the soft yellow lights, grinding coffee beans by hand, letting the smell of roasted warmth fill the room. He liked the rain. It was predictable, soothing. It blurred the edges of noise outside and made the world smaller, simpler. On rainy days, he didn't feel the emptiness in his chest as much, that quiet ache left behind by years he rarely talked about. At exactly 9, the bell above the door chimed, soft and metallic, and the first customer of the day walked in. He wasn't new, not really. Adrian had noticed him several times over the past month. Always alone. Always sitting by the window. Always ordering the same thing, a black coffee with a single cube of sugar, nothing else. Today, though, there was something different. The man looked more tired than usual. His hair was damp, the edge of his sleeve soaked from the rain. He carried a worn sketchbook pressed against his chest as if it were fragile. Adrian offered a faint smile. The usual. The man looked up, and for the first time, Adrian met his eyes properly. They were a deep, quiet blue, like the color of the sky just before it breaks into rain. "Yes," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Please." Adrian nodded and turned to prepare the drink. Behind him, the sound of rain against the glass filled the silence. The faint hum of jazz from the old record player floated in the air. When he brought the cup to the table, the man was staring out the window, lost somewhere far away. "Here you go," Adrian said. The man blinked, as if waking from a thought. "Thank you." He hesitated for a second, then smiled faintly, a small, polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Adrian wanted to ask his name, but something about his expression, the quiet distance, made him pause. So instead, he just said, "If you need a towel, there's one near the counter." "Thanks," the man said again. He didn't move to get it. For the next hour, Adrian watched him from behind the counter as he sketched silently, pencil gliding over paper in slow, careful strokes. From what Adrian could see, the drawing seemed to be of the street outside, the rain, the umbrellas, the faint silhouettes of people walking past. But there was a softness in the way he drew the world, as if he was trying to capture something invisible, not what things looked like, but what they felt like. When the man finally closed his sketchbook and stood up to leave, Adrian found himself speaking before he could think. "It's still raining hard," he said. "You can stay a while longer if you'd like." The man turned, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. I guess I will." That was how it began. His name, Adrian learned later that afternoon, was Luca. He was an illustrator, freelance, mostly working from home, though lately, he admitted, "I haven't drawn much that matters." He spoke with that same quietness that Adrian recognized in himself, the kind that came from someone who had learned to hold the world carefully, afraid of breaking it or being broken by it. Days passed. Rain continued. Luca came almost every afternoon, always at the same table by the window, always ordering the same black coffee. Sometimes he sketched. Sometimes he just sat there, watching the rain. And Adrian, without meaning to, found his gaze drifting toward him again and again. It wasn't infatuation, not at first. It was more like curiosity, or recognition. The way Luca's eyes softened when he looked at the rain, the way his hands trembled slightly when he reached for the cup. There was something familiar in it, that quiet loneliness. One evening, just before closing, Luca lingered longer than usual. The cafe was empty except for them. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. "You close at 9, right?" Luca asked. "Yes." He nodded. "You ever get tired of the rain?" Adrian smiled faintly. "No. It's predictable." "I like that." "Predictable," Luca repeated, almost to himself. "That sounds peaceful." "It is," Adrian said, wiping the counter. I used to like it," Luca said. "Now I just watch it." He said it quietly, but in that sentence was something heavy, a story left untold. Adrian didn't press. Instead, he reached for 2 mugs, poured fresh coffee, and slid one toward Luca. "On the house," he said simply. Luca blinked. "Why?" Adrian shrugged. "You look like you could use a second cup." For the first time since they met, Luca laughed, softly, unexpectedly. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it was warm, like a sudden beam of sunlight between clouds. "Thanks," he said. That night, when Luca left, Adrian found a small sketch left behind on the table. It was of the cafe, the counter, the window, the faint silhouette of him behind the espresso machine. At the bottom corner, a small note read, "Thank you for the warmth." Adrian stood there for a long moment, looking at the drawing, feeling something unfamiliar stir in his chest. He didn't know it then, but the rain that night sounded softer than usual. The next morning, the rain had not stopped. It came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes heavy, but always present, like the steady rhythm of a heartbeat Adrian had grown used to. He stood behind the counter of Haven Brew, drying cups with a soft cloth, when he saw Luca again. The same sketchbook under his arm. The same slow, thoughtful steps. But today, his eyes were different, less guarded, almost searching. "Morning," Adrian greeted. "Morning," Luca echoed, his lips curving just slightly. "I figured you'd be open even with the rain." "I always am." Adrian smiled faintly. "Coffee?" "The usual," Luca said, but then hesitated. "Actually, maybe something sweeter today." "Surprise me." Adrian raised an eyebrow but nodded. He made a caramel latte, carefully dusted with cinnamon. When he placed it in front of Luca, the artist smiled softly. "You remembered I like cinnamon." "I notice things," Adrian said simply. There was a pause. Then Luca opened his sketchbook and slid it across the counter. "I drew this last night," he said quietly. Adrian looked down. It was another sketch of the cafe, but this time, it was brighter. The rain was still outside the window, but there was light now, warm light pouring from the lamps, reflecting on wooden surfaces. And at the center, behind the counter, was Adrian, drawn in soft pencil lines, his eyes calm but kind. "It's beautiful," Adrian murmured. Luca looked away, embarrassed. "It's just something I do to keep from thinking too much." "About what?" Adrian asked gently. Luca hesitated. The rain filled the silence between them. "About how things change too quickly. How people leave. How nothing feels stable anymore." Adrian didn't ask further. He knew that feeling too well. He just said, "Then maybe that's why you draw, to keep something still." Luca looked up, and for the first time, there was real emotion in his eyes. "Yeah," he whispered. "Maybe." Over the next few weeks, Luca became a constant part of the cafe's rhythm. He arrived every morning after the first rush of customers, always bringing the soft scent of rain with him. He would sit by the same window, sketching or reading, sometimes talking with Adrian about small, unimportant things, books, coffee beans, the sound of storms. There was something peaceful about those conversations. They never rushed. They never filled silence just to fill it. Sometimes they just sat there, both listening to the rain, saying nothing at all. And slowly, something began to shift inside Adrian. He found himself looking forward to Luca's presence, the soft sound of his pencil, the faint smile when Adrian placed a cup in front of him. It was subtle, like the way the rain seeps into the soil without anyone noticing, until the flowers begin to bloom again. One afternoon, after closing, Adrian saw Luca still sitting by the window. His head rested against the glass, eyes closed. He looked tired, but peaceful. Adrian quietly approached, placing a cup of hot chocolate beside him. "You're closing soon," Luca murmured without opening his eyes. "I know," Adrian said. "But I figured you could use this before you go." Luca opened his eyes slowly and smiled, a real smile this time, soft and genuine. "You really do notice everything." Adrian chuckled quietly. "Maybe I just notice you." There was a pause, long enough for both to realize what had just been said. The rain pattered gently against the glass, filling the air with its steady rhythm. Luca lowered his gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not used to people noticing me anymore." "Then maybe it's time someone did," Adrian replied softly. It was a simple moment. But for both of them, it lingered. That night, Adrian lay awake in his small apartment above the café, listening to the rain tap against the windows. He thought about Luca, the way his eyes softened when he smiled, the quiet sadness behind his words, the gentle strength he carried without realizing it. For years, Adrian had kept to himself. He'd learned that distance was safer, that silence hurt less than loss. But now, for the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let someone in again. Downstairs, on the counter, still sat the small sketch Luca had given him weeks ago. Adrian had framed it, though he'd never admit it. A few days later, Luca didn't come. Then another day passed. And another. The cafe felt emptier than usual. Adrian tried to tell himself it didn't matter, that people came and went all the time. But every time he looked at the table by the window, his chest tightened. On the fourth day, just as he was closing up, the bell above the door rang, and there he was. Luca stood in the doorway, drenched, no umbrella, clutching his sketchbook tightly. His hair stuck to his forehead, and his eyes, those quiet blue eyes, looked lost. "Luca?" Adrian said, stepping forward. "What happened?" Luca tried to smile, but it faltered. "I'm sorry I disappeared. I just needed to think." Adrian guided him inside, grabbed a towel, and handed it to him. "Sit down. You'll catch a cold." Luca sank into the nearest chair, shivering slightly. "I got a call," he said quietly. "An offer. A studio wants to sponsor my work." "That's good, isn't it?" "It is," Luca said. "It's in another city." The words hung between them, heavy and still. Adrian turned away, busying himself with the coffee machine though his hands trembled slightly. "When do you leave?" "Next week," Luca said. Neither of them spoke after that. The rain outside grew louder, pressing against the windows like an echo of what neither could say. When Adrian finally set the cup of coffee in front of Luca, their hands brushed, just barely, but it was enough. Luca looked up. His eyes glistened, not from the rain this time. "I don't want to go," he whispered. "Then don't," Adrian said before he could stop himself. Luca blinked. "You know I can't just stay." Adrian swallowed. "I know." Silence again. The kind that hurt. Then, quietly, Luca said, "If I leave, would you miss me?" Adrian looked at him, truly looked at him. "I already do." Luca's breath caught. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. So Adrian did the only thing that felt right. He reached out and took Luca's hand, just a touch, gentle and careful, as if afraid it would vanish. Luca didn't pull away. For a moment, the rain outside slowed. That night, when Luca finally left, the cafe felt colder. The sketchbook he always carried was still on the table. Adrian called after him, but he was already gone. He opened the book carefully. Inside was a half-finished drawing of the cafe, two figures sitting across from each other, coffee cups between them. One was clearly Luca. The other. Adrian recognized his own face, drawn with soft lines, a faint smile that he hadn't realized he wore. At the bottom of the page were 4 words written in pencil. Sometimes, staying hurts too. Adrian closed the book slowly. He didn't know whether to smile or cry. Outside, the rain kept falling. The next morning came softly, wrapped in mist and the faint scent of rain. The clouds hung low over the city, blurring its edges, as though the world itself hadn't quite woken up. Adrian stirred from sleep slowly, the warmth of the blanket cocooning him, the smell of coffee seeping through the slightly open door. He blinked once, twice, and remembered. Luca. He sat up, brushing his fingers through his hair. The memory of last night felt both vivid and fragile, like a dream he was afraid to lose. He glanced toward the small kitchenette, and there Luca was, in a gray hoodie, hair tousled, quietly pouring hot water over coffee grounds. The sight was almost too much in its simplicity. "Morning," Adrian said softly. Luca turned, surprised but smiling. "You're up. I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." Adrian hesitated, eyes lingering on the steam curling up from the mug. "I thought maybe you were gone." Luca looked down at the counter, then back up with that shy, searching gaze. "I was going to leave a note, but then I remembered what you said about hating goodbyes." Adrian let out a faint laugh, quiet, but real. "I guess I did say that." Luca handed him a mug. "So, maybe no goodbyes today. Just coffee." Adrian took the mug, fingers brushing against Luca's. The warmth spread through him, slow and steady. Outside, rain pattered against the window, softer now, like a lullaby. They drank in silence for a while. The room felt filled not with words but with something gentler, something unspoken that didn't need to be. Finally, Luca said, "I don't know where I'm going next. I don't even know what I'm looking for. But, this place, it felt like somewhere I could breathe again." Adrian looked at him, the ache in his chest deep but not painful anymore. "Then stay," he said quietly. "For a while. As long as you need." Luca's eyes flickered with surprise, then softened. "You mean it?" "Yeah." Adrian smiled faintly. "The shop could use another set of hands, anyway. And I could use the company." Luca's laugh was quiet, almost disbelieving. "You really don't know what you're signing up for." Adrian shrugged, teasing. "You make a decent cappuccino. That's good enough." They both laughed then, a small, healing sound that filled the room and melted into the rain. Days turned into weeks. The café, Little Haven, as Luca had once called it, slowly transformed. Luca repainted the walls a soft cream, hung dried lavender above the counter, and convinced Adrian to move the tables closer to the window so the light could spill across the floor in golden streaks. Business picked up, too. Maybe it was the new warmth in the air, or maybe customers could sense the quiet peace that had settled into the space. Sometimes, when the rain came and the world blurred beyond the glass, Adrian would catch Luca humming softly while wiping cups or arranging flowers in small jars. One afternoon, an old woman came in with her grandson. Luca crouched down to hand the boy a cookie shaped like a star, his smile tender, his eyes full of something both young and ancient. Adrian watched from behind the counter, a quiet realization dawning on him. He had spent so long living behind walls, convincing himself he didn't need anyone, that solitude was safer. But then this boy had walked into his life like rain after a drought, washing everything clean. When Luca looked up and met his gaze, he smiled, that soft, crooked smile that still made Adrian's heartbeat falter. And in that moment, Adrian understood something simple yet profound: healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about finding someone who would stand with you, quietly, until the pain no longer defined the day. One evening, long after the last customer left, Luca lingered by the door, gazing at the rain shimmering beneath the streetlights. Adrian joined him, drying his hands on a towel. "Still raining," Luca murmured. "Always does, this time of year." Luca smiled. "Do you ever get tired of it?" Adrian thought for a moment. "Used to. But now, I think it's comforting. It reminds me that nothing stays broken forever." Luca looked up, eyes reflecting the soft amber glow of the streetlight. "You always talk like that, calm, steady, like the world makes sense." "It doesn't," Adrian said with a quiet laugh. "But sometimes, someone comes along and makes it feel like it could." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain filled the silence, a gentle rhythm, like the world breathing. Then Luca whispered, almost to himself, "I used to think I was just passing through. Like I didn't belong anywhere." Adrian turned toward him. "You belong here." Luca looked at him, really looked, and something broke open in his expression, something fragile and beautiful. He stepped closer, close enough that Adrian could see the tiny droplets caught in his hair. "You mean that?" he asked, voice trembling just a little. Adrian reached out, his hand finding Luca's. "I do." The space between them dissolved. Luca's forehead rested against Adrian's, soft and trembling, as the rain whispered its eternal lullaby outside. And for the first time in a long, long while, both of them felt it, peace. Months passed. Spring edged its way back into the city, and with it came sunlight, laughter, and the faint scent of blooming jasmine. The rain didn't disappear entirely, but it came less often now, like a memory instead of a constant companion. Little Haven became a quiet favorite among locals, a place where time slowed, where strangers found warmth in shared silence. One morning, Adrian opened the café early and found a small, neatly wrapped package on the counter. A note rested on top. "For the man who taught me how to stay." Inside was a tiny ceramic cup, imperfect, slightly uneven, but beautiful in its flaws. Adrian ran his thumb along its edge and smiled, heart swelling with something he couldn't quite name. When Luca walked in moments later, carrying fresh pastries and pretending not to notice, Adrian caught him by the wrist. "You made this?" Luca hesitated, then nodded. "It's not perfect." Adrian set it gently on the shelf behind the counter, beside the others. "That's the point," he said softly. "Neither are we." Luca's smile was shy and luminous all at once. "Guess that's what makes us fit." They stood there for a while, morning light spilling through the windows, painting everything in gold. The sound of distant rain lingered faintly, not sad, not heavy, just there, like an old song they both knew by heart. Adrian poured 2 cups of coffee. Luca leaned against the counter, watching the steam curl upward. "Do you ever think about how strange it is?" Luca asked. "That all of this, us, started because of a rainy day?" Adrian smiled. "Maybe it wasn't strange at all. Maybe the rain just knew what it was doing." Luca laughed softly, and Adrian thought it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Outside, the city glistened under a soft drizzle, alive with reflections and movement. Inside, 2 souls, once wandering, now found, shared coffee, laughter, and the quiet certainty that they were exactly where they needed to be. Epilogue. Years later, people still came to Little Haven on rainy days, drawn by the warm light spilling from its windows and the faint melody of jazz playing inside. Behind the counter, a man with kind eyes and gray at his temples would serve coffee, while another arranged flowers in a small vase, humming softly. And when the first raindrop tapped against the glass, one of them would smile at the other and say, "Listen, the rain's singing again." The other would answer, Yeah. It always does when it's happy. Outside, rain fell